Hi, welcome to class day. So, really sorry for the late update for today's video, because I've been quite busy with my O-level students as well. So today we're just going to continue with the topic that we were left on. Okay. So the topic that we're going to continue today would be about infectious disease, right? So if you could take out your book, or if you could take out your textbook or your notes to go as I actually go through the paper with you, okay, the notes with you. So it'll be very helpful. And whilst at the same time, I will also show you the slides here as well. Okay, it's actually, I actually take it from the portions of some books. Okay, but before we actually go through, just go through the syllabus first, which I will show it to you here. Okay, so this is a topic that we're going to go through today, right? So it will be about infectious disease, right? And what do you need to know about this? Okay, so what do you need to know about this topic about infectious diseases is these are the learning outcomes. So by the end of this video, you should be quite familiar with this, all the learning outcomes here. Okay, so number one, what we're going to do first is we're going to identify the terms disease. We were going to be able to define what do we mean by diseases, okay? And as well as we can explain the differences between upper infectious disease and the non-infectious diseases. Okay, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna define, and we're gonna know which one is infectious, which one is non-infectious. And secondly, what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the name and the different types of diseases, the infectious diseases, okay? And the infectious diseases that we're going to look at would be limited to cholera, malaria, tuberculosis, which is TB, HIV/AIDS, smallpox, and measles, okay? So these are the list of infectious diseases that we would be discussing, okay? And for all of these, we need to know what are the name and the type of causative organisms. So in other words, what is causing TB, for example? What is causing cholera? What is causing malaria? Okay, is it bacteria? Is it fungi? Is it virus? Or what? So on and so forth. Right? And we also need to know how they are transmitted. Okay, how the modes of transmission, yeah, macam mana ia get what do we call that? How it gets transferred from how it gets infected from one person to another. And we're also going to discuss about the biological, social, and economic factors that are considered in the prevention and control of cholera. Okay, so how do we, what factors do we take in when we want to do the prevention and we want to do the control of certain type of diseases? Okay, so we're going to have a look at the biological factor, social factor, as well as the economic factor as well. Okay, the factors, sorry. Okay, how do they actually underplay with the transmissions of such diseases, right? And lastly, we will also going to be discussing about the factors that influence the global patterns of distributions of malaria. Okay, so how the infection, how come certain infections only occurs in certain parts of the world, okay, and it doesn't occur throughout the world, and how come certain type of infections is prevalent throughout the world? How come in some it's only in certain parts, in certain areas of the world? Okay, that's what we're going to look at. What are the factors that affect that comes into play about it? Okay. So without further ado, we're just going to jump straight. Okay, so it's going to be quite straightforward. Okay, along this topic is quite straightforward anyway, right? So it's just going to be knowing what they are, how do they get transport, how they get transferred, and how do we control, how do we measure it, okay? How do we control and prevent it, right? So firstly, we need to know what is the definition of a disease, okay? So this is the definition that is being given, right? So if you just take note as we go through, right? So what is a disease? A disease is a disorder of the body that leads to ill health. So anything that is beyond the normal functions of the body, which causes some form of pain, which causes some pain, some form of distress to you, okay, which or in some kind of this discomfort, right? So anything that leads to disorder of the body, that leads to illness, is what we call as a disease, okay? And there generally you can divide diseases into two categories. So number one is what we call is infectious disease, which is what we're going to look at. And second is what we know as non-infectious disease. Okay, so there are diseases can generally be divided into two, right? So what is infectious disease? So it's quite obvious what is infectious. So it simply means any disease which can be transmitted, easily transmitted from one person to another. Okay, so it is transmissible. You can pass on from one person to another. Okay, so here, that can be passed between one person to another, and they are usually caused by what we call as pathogens, right? So pathogens is essentially there are disease-causing organisms, okay? So there are disease-causing organisms, and usually they are mainly composed of microorganisms, such as viruses, bacteria, fungi, or pathogens, okay? So virus, you know about this. This is the reasons why we're doing it, and the coronavirus and so on and so forth. Okay, so bacteria is also another reason, another one of the main causative agents for infectious disease. Fungi as well, and lastly about pathogens. So pathogens would be in the transmissions of malaria, okay, plasmodium malaria, which we'll have it later. And the second type of disease is what we call as the non-infectious disease. So non-infectious disease is simply diseases, it says here, that cannot be passed between people and it is not caused by pathogens. So this is the type of diseases which you can't get it if you touch the person or if you're being near to the person, okay? You get the disease simply because you actually acquired it, okay? You get the diseases, those kind of diseases, okay? You don't get it simply by touching another person. And the examples that you should have gone through is about sickle cell anemia. So sickle cell anemia is an acquired disease and it is true genetic. And second is about lung cancer. So this is a type of non-infectious disease, okay? It is not genetic, okay? Well, maybe some parts is genetic. Okay? The research it's saying that, but you can also develop it over time, right? So these kind of diseases, which also include, for example, your heart disease, your gastrointestinal diseases, the development of gastric ulcers, and so on and so forth. Those are what we call as non-infectious disease. Okay. Right. So if you just jump straight to the first type of important infectious disease that we should know is cholera. Okay. So what is the cholera? So this is the one, the disease yang membuatkan kita ni cerita berat. Okay, usually if you have cholera, one of the symptoms, the signs and symptoms is that you will feel very weak, and then you would go to the toilet almost all of the time, and you would certainly have what we call it explosive diarrhea. Okay, so it's very, very uncomfortable, and it would result in the person to feel quite weak, and they're not able, because they keep losing a lot of water, a lot of fluid from the body. Okay, simply because they always go to the toilet all of the time, right? And this disease, this cholera, is an infectious disease, and it's actually caused by bacterium. It's caused by a bacteria, what we call as Vibrio cholerae. Okay, so it is actually caused by this bacterium, what we call as Vibrio cholerae. Okay, I'm not going to go through what is bacterium, upper structures now. Okay, you don't need to know about that. But what you need to know is that it is caused by this bacterium, what we call Vibrio cholerae. Okay, and how is it transmitted? Well, the Vibrio cholerae, so simply we call it as V. cholerae, can enter the body in contaminated food or water. So apa maksudnya, you can actually acquire this disease. You can get infected through by drinking or eating any contaminated food, any food that has been exposed to the bacterium, the Vibrio cholerae. Okay, for example, any unsanitized food, okay, or unsterilized water. Okay, so particularly in water, right? So what actually happens is this bacteria, okay, the bacteria breed in the small intestine where they secrete a toxin that reduces the ability of the epithelium of the small intestine to absorb salt and water into the blood. So what it's saying here is this bacteria, okay, once you actually ingest it, okay, once you ingest the contaminated food and water, so what will happen is they will actually go directly to your small intestine, okay, so to your duodenum and your ileum. And what they will actually do, they will actually embed themselves. So what do they do? They actually screw themselves in, okay? They actually embed themselves in, they will penetrate arah the epithelial wall. So this is kira the walls of your small intestine. So what they are doing, the Vibrio cholerae, so they are actually macam ia drill a hole masuk ia arah sini, ia tinggal di sini. Okay, and what they do is they at the same time they will actually be releasing toxins. Okay, and these toxins, what they are doing is they're actually causing the leakage of sodium. Okay, the leakage of sodium, and as well as the leakage of water. So usually, kalau small intestine, it is to do with the absorptions of water. Okay, that's where your water gets absorbed into your blood, your salts get absorbed into your blood. But what happens is this Vibrio cholerae, okay, they actually mess up with the absorptions of water and the absorptions of salt. They mess it up. So as a result, what will happen is that it'll also mess up with your blood water potential. Okay, so as a result, instead of absorbing a lot of water, that water and that salt, it's making your small intestine much more concentrated now because the salt cannot be absorbed. Okay, so all the water has gone down to large intestine and been removed, and it's making your small intestine, the inside of your small intestine, very, very concentrated. So as a result, they keep drawing blood, not blood, they actually keep drawing out water out from the blood into the small intestine, and therefore causing a lot of fluid being excreted out. Okay, so all the fluid being excreted out, it mixes with the feces, and therefore it causes the feces to be very fluid and therefore causing diarrhea. Okay, so here, all of those, the excess fluid, are therefore lost in the feces, causing diarrhea. Okay, and sorry, okay, and if it's actually not treated, right? If it's not treated, the loss of fluid can be fatal because you keep losing a lot of water. Okay, if you keep losing a lot of water, a lot of fluid, then what will happen is your cells, your body tissues will become very dehydrated. Okay, and it becomes very dehydrated. So this is actually is very detrimental to your cells. It's very detrimental to your tissues, and it actually causes your cells to shrivel up. Okay, they become queenated. And if it's shrivel up, they become queenated, then it can lead to tissue death. Okay, tissue death, cell punya death, and therefore it will cause the dysfunction, this area, the stopping of your organs, right? And therefore it can lead to death, fatal, right? And cholera, where does it likely to happen? Where does it occur? It usually occur when people use water or food that has been in contact with untreated sewage. Okay, as the bacteria are present in the feces of an infected person. So this is kira one of the most main culprits. Okay, how do they actually easily get transported? Okay, easily get transferred from one person to another. It's simply because, for example, let's say you have been infected with diarrhea. Sorry, not diarrhea, with cholera, right? So if you have been, you always go to the toilet, and then kalau in developed countries, it's good. Because most of the developed countries usually they would have a very good sewage treatment system. Okay, so your toilet actually goes somewhere to be processed and it doesn't mix with your drinking water. But here what we're talking about is we're talking about in some cases whereby the access to clean drinking water, to sanitize water is actually very hard. So contohnya macam in less developed countries, right? Whereby they take orang punya drinking water simply taking from the river, contohnya, right? And di sana jua orang mengambil air minum, di sana jua tempat orang mencuci, beria berkamera apa, right? So if the infected person does the business in the river, for example, and then along the way, so as a result, in the river is now contaminated with the cholera, right? The Vibrio, the bacterium. Now the bacterium is now present in the water, and the water is being taken, and let's say they don't really sterilize it as much. Maybe macam masak sekejap, right? Or even worse, they don't masak it, they taruh simply minum, right? So what will happen? Now the person yang awal-awal uninfected, now they can become infected simply because they drink the untreated sewage, not untreated sewage, the unsterilized water, okay, which has been probably mixes with any untreated sewage, okay? And therefore, what is the method to prevent and control them? So how do we actually ensure that this is less likely to happen? So transmission is most likely to occur in crowded and impoverished conditions. So tempat selalunya this cholera ini ia selalu terjadi pada tempat yang sempit-sempit and impoverished conditions. So contohnya macam arah slum, okay? Arah tempat yang it's very a slum settlement, tempat apa Malaynya? I don't know what the Malay is. I know it as slums. It's very impoverished. Payah dapat clean water, payah dapat tap water, electricity pun dah, it's usually they live under the poverty line, right? And contohnya arah mana? Contohnya such as the refugee camps. Okay, so those are where they're likely to occur. And what is the best way to control is simply by treating the sewage effectively, as well as providing a clean water supply and maintaining a good hygiene in food preparation. So this is the best way in order for you to control, to ensure that the cholera punya spread is very, very limited, it's very, very secret. Okay, so number one, the best thing that you could do is you need to treat the sewage. Now, so jangan sekati-sekati they cannot sekati-sekati go to the toilet and then everything that goes into the toilet atau terus masuk arah sungai saja. Indah kena filter dulu. Okay, we need to filter it. We need to treat the sewage first before we actually dump it into the into the river or into the sea. Okay. Second is obviously you need to ensure that you have a clean water supply. Okay, this is for drinking, right? And lastly, is by maintaining good hygiene in food preparation. So masa kamu membuat, when you are preparing your food, obviously you need to wash it bisa-bisa. You need to use when you are preparing food, you need to wash everything else, but you need to make sure that when you are washing it, you're actually using water which are free from cholera as well, okay, which has been sanitized. Well, not really sanitized, but which has been treated. Okay, it's not mixing with the cholera, because otherwise it will be the same case anyway. Okay, and the thing with cholera is there is no fully effective vaccine for cholera. So you can't have any vaccine. Okay, you can't have macam kalau COVID-19, we have the vaccines going on. But for cholera, we don't have any vaccination program for it. Okay? It's simply because what happens is it's actually very, very hard to target this microorganism, like this bacterium. Because once it actually penetrates into the wall, when you are trying to target it, it's di dalam, okay? It's di dalam, it's bercampur dengan your normal cell. So if you get a vaccine, they make antibodies, and that antibodies, it's very hard for them to identify any Vibrio cholerae yang sudah embedded. Okay, if it's di luar, and then maybe it's tanam, if it's just swimming in the blood. But what happens is, if this time it insert itself into the epithelium, so ia bertapuk arah the epithelium, supaya antibody yang dalam darah itu untuk menganggap. Okay, so that's why it's very hard to get an effective vaccine for cholera. So therefore, the best way is to prevent and to control by using all of these methods here. Okay, so that's the outline for bacteria. So for cholera, right? Okay, for cholera. Next is we're going to look at malaria. Okay, so malaria is usually, yang it's macam dengue fever. Okay, so dengue fever, all of those things yang melalui mosquito, right? And usually they will actually carry this microorganisms, what we call as protective, and they are a class of microorganisms. They are in the Plasmodium. The genus is the Plasmodium. Okay, so malaria, ia punya causative agent is a protective, what we call as Plasmodium. Okay, so this is the genus class, the genus for this agent, this microorganism. Species now, they actually have different types. So you have Plasmodium, I don't know, you have different types, but it's enough for you to know that Plasmodium is causing malaria. Okay, so what do they do? How is the mode of action here? Okay, so how do they actually do? The Plasmodium infects the red blood cell and breeds infect them. Then toxins are released when the Plasmodium bursts out of the cells, causing fever. Okay, so that's how they work. Okay, so once it actually gets into your body, so for example, you have been bitten because the vector, which was, well, I will discuss later, upper vector. Okay, the vector for this malaria is this Plasmodium is mosquito, and sometimes you are bitten by the mosquito, the female Anopheles mosquito. And if the female Anopheles mosquito is infected, when they are feeding feeding on your blood, what they will have to do is they will inject dorang punya proboscis atau dorang punya proboscis mouth. They will actually inject their own saliva, and as they are injecting their own saliva, it is possible that they will also inject the Plasmodium, because the Plasmodium lives around the salivary gland of the mosquito, right? So once they cucuk, you release saliva into the blood. The reason why they release it in the first place is because they want to prevent the blood from coagulating. So they want to prevent the blood from clumping. Pasal kalau clumping, payah dia akan menyirok darahnya tu. So they actually give a toxin arah through dorang punya saliva supaya ia in the clotting. And when they release it, dorang punya saliva inside, accidentally, okay, without orang punya own control, they will also be able to release the Plasmodium. Okay, they will be releasing the Plasmodium masuk arah darah kamu. And what will happen is that the Plasmodium itu, they will then masuk into your bloodstream, and they will actually target, they're quite sneaky, they will actually target your red blood cells. Okay, they will masuk arah your red blood cells, they live inside your red blood cells, and once they live inside your red blood cells, they will actually breathe inside. So they will multiply. So they will multiply, they become more and more and more and more and more. And once it is full, once this one red blood cell is full with the Plasmodium, then it will eventually burst. And once it bursts, now you have a lot of Plasmodium again. And this Plasmodium can now infect a lot more of the red blood cells. Okay, so as a result, you will feel quite weak, and you will feel feverish as well. Okay, because of the toxins that are being released by the Plasmodium as they actually burst. Okay, so that's the mode of action for malaria. Now, how is it transmitted? Okay, before that, I'm sorry. Yeah, I want to go through first. Okay, so a vector. Before I go through how it is transmitted, I want to go through first what is a vector. So it says here, a vector is an organism that transmits a pathogen from one host to another. So any organism which actually causes, which actually is acting like a medium to transport, to infect one pathogen to another one pathogen from one person to another person. This is what we call as a vector. So vector is a medium, huh? Right? And in the case of Plasmodium, malaria, what is the vector? The vector is actually the female Anopheles mosquito, right? So what do they do? Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, so Plasmodium is transmitted in the saliva of the female Anopheles mosquito, because the female Anopheles mosquito, they are the one that actually drink your blood. Okay, and as I said, when they are trying to drink your blood, they will have to inject orang punya saliva, okay, to prevent what? To prevent blood clotting, right? So that they can easily suck on the blood. But when they injected, okay, as the female, the infected female Anopheles mosquito, they inject orang punya proboscis. And then what will happen is the Plasmodium will accidentally get transferred to the person that she is drinking from as well. Okay. So the Plasmodium is taken up into the mosquito's body, and eventually it reaches the salivary gland, and the mosquito is said to be a vector for the malaria. Okay, so once it goes there, dia masuk arah badan orang itu, dan dia masuk target arah dia punya red blood cells. Okay, and that's how it gets transmitted. Okay, so awal-awal female itu, the female mosquito, maybe awal-awal ia in the infected. Kalau ia awal-awal in the infected, sekali minum ke darah orang yang infected. Okay, so termasuk dalam badannya, dan ia membiak dulu dalam the mosquito, sudah ia membiak dalam the mosquito, and then mengagak arah salivary gland mosquito. Sudah yang mengagak arah salivary gland mosquito, let's say this mosquito ni mengagak lagi arah orang yang lain, orang yang tidak infected. And when she inject her proboscis, therefore she also inject the Plasmodium accidentally. So that's how they get transmitted, right? And how do we control? Sorry. So what's the best way to control and prevent the transmissions for malaria? So the best way is by anything that can reduce the population of mosquito. So caranya, for example, removing sources of water in which they can breathe, or by releasing a large number of sterile males can reduce the transmission of malaria. So in other words, the only best way in order to control the spread of malaria is actually by removing the vector. Okay, we are trying to reduce the number of vectors here. Okay, in other words, we are trying to kill all the female Anopheles mosquitoes. Okay, we want to make sure they're not going around to transfer the malaria around, the Plasmodium around. Okay, so how do we do that? Is number one, we remove dia punya breeding ground. Okay, what's the breeding ground for mosquito? Is any stagnant water. Okay, any water yang in the flow. Contohnya air bertakung, air dalam tangki kah, air arah longkang kah, air arah sungai, not sungai mengalir. Anything in the mengalir lah. Okay, but actually the good breeding place for mosquito. So what we do is we remove this. Ilangkan tah air di longkang, ilangkan tah air arah tayar whatsoever. Okay, that's number one, removing the sources of water in which they can breathe. Number two is by releasing a large number of sterile males. Apa maksud sterile males? Maksudnya mosquito yang mandul. Okay, so artinya mosquitonya tu sperm punya mosquito tu in the bisai. Okay, so kalau ada sperm yang bisai untuk mosquito, artinya Indah boleh membuat banyak egg. Okay, well, they can make egg, but you cannot fertilize the egg. Kalau cannot fertilize the egg, artinya number of babies, mosquito punya baby kurang. So kalau number of mosquito punya baby kurang, artinya kuranglah mosquito. Okay? Kurang mosquito, kurang malaria. Right? Another way is also methods of preventing mosquito from biting people. So contohnya, sleeping under a mosquito net or wearing long sleeve clothing and insect repellent can reduce the chances of mosquito picking up plasmodium. Okay, so another way is for our own initiative. Kita ni punya inisiatif untuk prevent. So apa kami punya inisiatif itu? Kami tidur pakai net, pakai mosquito net atau what namanya, pakai kelambu, ya. Pakai kelambu ataupun memakai pakaian yang panjang tangan ataupun pakai insect repellent supaya mosquito itu takut dia akan menggigit. Okay, and if you for some reason you get infected, okay, you can also take this or not infected lah, but if you want to go to some area that you know is prone to malaria, then you can take this type of drug. Is what we call it prophylactic drugs. Okay, what is it? It is a type of drugs that can prevent pathogens from infecting and breeding in a person. Okay, so this is a type of drug, you know, to make essentially to macam prevent the plasmodium daripada infecting your red blood cells lah. Okay, but the problem with this is some of the plasmodium punya species, they actually have developed resistance to this type of prophylactic drugs. Okay, so this is probably not the best options that you have. Okay, moving on, the next infectious disease that we're going to look at is TB. Okay, tuberculosis. Right, so tuberculosis is apa symptomsnya, apa signsnya if you have a TB. So symptomsnya, you would have a dry heaving cough. Okay, so kamu atau batuk, berabis batuk bakahak sampai berdarah apa semua sekali. Okay, that is the signs, the major signs of TB. And what's the cause-nya is actually caused by this bacterium, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Or kalau in more rarely is Mycobacterium bovis. Okay, so TB, tuberculosis, TB. Okay, so it is, ini dia punya species, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, but there are in a class, in a group of bacterium, what we call as Mycobacterium. Now, how do they get transmitted? Okay, macam mana the Mycobacterium ini boleh transmit? So what they are doing is the tuberculosis can enter the lungs. Okay, it says it can enter the lungs in airborne droplet of liquid that are breathed in. So maksudnya kalau orang yang kena TB itu bercakap, habis terkeluar segala air liurnya, so air liurnya ni tersambur-sambur, so air liurnya tu is airborne. Okay, kalau ia berasin pun the same thing. Kalau ia bercakap macam batuk, terkeluar apa, tersirup dah oleh orang lain. Then the chances are that other person yang uninfected atau may become infected ada tuberculosis yang juga. Okay, and this is more likely to happen if people are actually living in a crowded condition. So tempat yang sampit-sampit. Okay, contohnya again arah mana? Arah slums, arah refugee camps, so on and so forth. Okay, so kalau tempat yang sampit-sampit itu artinya hampir-hampir je kita ni bercakap. Kalau hampir-hampir bercakap, katanya angliornya terkeluar, sengaja. Okay, so anglior terkeluar menampak lagi apa tu, lagi arah muka orang itu bergalis. Dan bergalis tadi rupanya TB. Okay, so that's one way that they get transmitted. And prevention, the method to prevent and to control the spread of TB. Okay, and as you can see here, TB is most prevalent amongst people living in poor accommodation and whose immune system are not functioning well. That's because of malnutrition or infections with HIV. Okay, so apa maksudnya? So kalau TB ini is selalunya terjadi arah orang yang tinggal arah tempat yang macam in the clean, in the beside, losi sampit-sampit, ramai tahu orang lagi dalam rumah tu. Okay, because everyone is there, so it's very clean, so it's macam senang untuk membiak. Lepas tu sudah banyak lagi other diseases. As a result, what will happen is that your immune system itu is also kurang. Kurang untuk apa? Kurang untuk melawan every other diseases. Okay. Yeah. So macam mana immune system kamu boleh kurang? It could be because you don't have enough food. Okay, kalau misalnya if you live in poor accommodation, so high chances are that you are poor. And if you are poor, then probably that you have a very limited access to nutrition. So maybe you have several malnutrition conditions, and or if you are infected with HIV, okay, which we'll have it later. What is HIV? Okay, which I'm pretty sure you know. And the only best way in order to prevent TB is simply by increasing the standard of living and treating HIV infections. Okay, by doing this, increasing the standard of living and treating HIV infections, it can significantly improve the control, the preventions for TB. Okay, because if you live in a poor condition, the chances are you're more likely to spread the disease. Okay, but if you live in a better conditions, you have, you know, ruang yang kamu tidur arah ruang besar, indah bercampur sama orang lain. Also, you have access to clean water. You always sanitize your area. Kamu selalu mop, and then kamu, you know, like you're clean lah. You're clean. You're increasing the standard of living. You're clean, and so on and so forth. Then it will significantly actually reduce the incidence of TB occurring. Okay, and there are actually vaccines in which you can take, okay, in order to confer immunity for TB. Okay, so certain vaccines that you can use in order to prevent you from getting TB. Okay, but this type of vaccine is, of course, it takes time to develop that. Okay, and not everyone will actually have access to this vaccination anyway. Okay, so wait, where was I? Treatment. Here. Treatment of HIV with drug therapy reduces the risk that an HIV person will get TB as well. So another way, kan kalau if you have HIV, okay, if you have HIV, that means your immune system will be so much weakened. If your immune system is weakened, that means you are more likely to get infected with every type of pathogen, including TB as well, right? So usually, if you have any programs to prevent HIV, then more likely what will happen is that you will also reduce the chances of developing TB as well. So, okay, so the prevention for HIV is also can positively correlated with the prevention for TB. Okay, and okay, here. Treatment of TB with antibiotics can often completely cure the disease. However, this is not always the case. Okay, so because we know that TB, okay, as you see, TB is caused by a bacterium, and as we know, kalau bacterium we can actually treat it with antibiotics. Okay, so technically, you can kill if you have TB. If you kena diagnosed awal, it has been identified quite awal. So what will happen is that you can take antibiotics to kill the mycobacterium, right? But it is possible. But the thing is, it's not always the case that you can kill all of them. Okay, why? Because number one, there are now many strains of M. tuberculosis. So as you can see here, TB is just one. You also have bovis as well, Mycobacterium bovis. Okay, so they actually have different species as well. And this one antibiotic that works for tuberculosis, it might not work with bovis, right? So it's not always the case that this antibiotic will cure everything. right? Because the new strains yang develop atau the new strains may get evolved. They become much more new, ada new variations, and therefore sometimes they become more increasing resistance to the antibiotics as well. So this also poses problems to the antibiotics. Second is the problem with this type of bacterium is that they actually reproduce inside the body cells. Right? Dorang membiak dalam kamu punya body cells, inside your cell, okay, dalam cell kamu, okay, which is therefore difficult for drugs to reach them. Okay, pasal apa? Pasal if you develop a drug that targets a cell that has been infected, okay, the problem is it's very hard to differentiate which cell has been infected, because the surface of a normal cell, normal healthy cell, would be quite similar to the surface of an infected cell, right? And if you develop a drug, then that means you need to develop a drug that targets the internal processes, the internal conditions of the cell, okay, which is very hard to develop, because kalau drugs atau the way that they work is they will bind with the receptor onto the outside surface of the cell, onto the cell membranes of the cells, right? And if they actually live inside, ia bertapuk di dalam, so it's very hard for them to identify which cell is infected, which cell is not infected. Okay, so that's the problem with this type of bacteria as well. Okay, so it's very difficult for drugs to reach them. Okay, so to recognize infected cells and therefore reach the mycobacterium. And usually, yeah, these type of drugs, these type of antibiotics, it will actually take a long time period in order for it to work. Okay, so it's not just that sekali kamu makan, esoknya terus baik. No. Okay, you need to take it. Let's say you would be prescribed with antibiotics. I'm pretty sure you have been prescribed with antibiotics before. Kena bagi untuk 2 minggu, kadangnya untuk seminggu, atau kadangnya ada yang untuk sebulan, right? So you need to take them religiously. Okay, mesti hari-hari in the pernah miss. Okay, and the thing is, if you are given with this antibiotics, okay, kadangnya sampai 2-3 bulan sampai setahun, hari-hari mesti indah boleh miss. Okay, and the thing is, kita ni we tend to forget. Okay, we tend to forget sometimes, terlupa akhir to skip whatsoever. Okay, which is not good, because if you terlupa sehari whatsoever, the chances are the bacterium, once you're in the kill, it only takes sometimes a few minutes or a few hours in order for them to develop resistance. Okay, so it's very, very important that you follow the timetable through. But the thing is, it's very hard for everyone to follow through. I'm pretty sure that some people will actually miss certain days when they are taking the antibiotics. Okay, so they need to be committed to it. And that's the problem with TB, transmissions of TB. Okay, the control of TB. Now, next is we're going to discuss about HIV and AIDS. Okay, so this one, you should be quite familiar because we've done this when we were in O-level before. Okay, so HIV is the causative agent. Yeah, this is the virus. Yeah, so from the name itself, it is caused by human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Okay, and ia punya disease-nya, okay, ini agents-nya, causative agents-nya, HIV. Disease-nya kami panggil apa? Disease-nya kami panggil AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Okay. Now, what is it? It is a type of what we call as a retrovirus. So what does a retrovirus mean? It simply means that they contain RNA. Okay, so instead of the normal DNA as their genetic material, that actually contains RNA. And what do these type of viruses do, the HIV? What they do is they're quite sneaky, because they actually target the white blood cells itself. They actually target the T lymphocytes. Okay, so T lymphocyte is actually a type of white blood cells. And as you know, that white blood cells, I mean, they are the cells that are responsible in finding, and killing any foreign particles. Okay, they're responsible in finding and killing any foreign particles by doing phagocytosis. And in this case, lymphocytes, it is actually by producing antibiotics. Okay, so what they're doing is they don't target any other cells, because if they target any other cells, then the white blood cells can come onto them, okay, and eat the infected cells together with them. But the thing is, they don't target all of those cells, they actually target the white blood cell itself. Okay, dorang kira menghasut, dorang tinggal menyamar arah polis, macam arah tempat mencari pathogen satu. Okay, so if you will, macam pathogen satu, macam criminal, and white blood cell is the police. And what this criminal is doing, this criminal is menyamar jadi polis. Okay, so that's kira macam the analogy. Right, so they enter into the T lymphocytes, which is used to make antibodies. And what will happen is once they actually enter into the T lymphocyte, they will inject orang punya RNA, masukkan arah the nucleus of the T lymphocyte in order to make dorang punya DNA. Okay, and once they make dorang punya DNA, so therefore they can, so this viral DNA, the HIV punya DNA itu, it can then be incorporated in the T lymphocyte chromosomes. So they can now masukkan arah the T lymphocyte punya DNA. So masukkannya sekali-sekali. Okay. So RNA tukarannya jadi DNA dulu, sudah jadi DNA, and then DNA-nya ni diselitkannya, dimasukkannya arah the T lymphocyte punya DNA. Okay, so which means the next time the T lymphocyte is trying to divide, trying to make something, trying to multiply, so they will accidentally make the virus punya protein, the virus punya components as well. Okay, so if they are making the virus punya components, so it's actually allowing, okay, jangan indah sengaja, it's actually allowing at the same time to make the virus. Okay, you know, a person who has been infected with HIV makes antibodies against the virus, and is also said to be HIV positive. Okay, but it's not like that. But this sentence here, it says a person who has been infected with HIV makes antibody against the virus and is said to be HIV positive. So how do we know that the person is HIV positive? How do we know that you actually have HIV? It's because we see ada kena antibody untuk HIV. Kalau misalnya ada kau membuat antibody untuk HIV, so the chances are you have been infected with HIV. Okay, but if let's say we look for antibody for HIV in dada, so artinya you are HIV negative. Okay, so you're HIV negative. And the thing is, usually nothing more happens for several years after infection, but eventually multiple copies of the virus are made inside the T lymphocytes, which are destroyed as the virus breaks out and infect more cells. Okay, so usually now, if you infected, it will not take the infections won't be laju. Okay, it will not be clearly that you will have it and you would know within a few days or a few weeks. Okay, it will actually take years in order for you to know that you actually have the infection. Okay, because you know, because they are quite sneaky, because they live inside the white blood cells, right? So it's very hard to detect anyway. But eventually, what will happen is that as the T lymphocytes grow, and as they are growing, they will also make copies of the viruses, right? And as they break out, then they are able to infect more and more T lymphocytes, more and more white blood cells. And that's when you started to know that, okay, now we have the virus, now we know that you are positive. Okay, so this
is this, sorry, I have to change. Now, how is this actually bad? Okay, because as I mentioned earlier, they are actually targeting T lymphocytes. Okay, they are targeting the white blood cells, the ones that are responsible in fighting off any infections. But the thing is, they are essentially killing off, slowly and silently killing off all the white blood cells, okay, all the T lymphocytes. So as a result, you will have a lower level of T lymphocytes, okay? You will have a lower level of the police, okay, or of the ones that are responsible in fighting off the disease, okay? And there will be so few functioning T lymphocytes that the person is no longer able to resist infections or by other pathogens. So in other words, the immune system for the person is very much being being compromised. Okay, ia punya immune system itu is luan rendah sudah, pasal white blood cellsnya tu pun luan sikit. So usually people with HIV or AIDS, they don't die because they have the virus itself, but they actually die because orang punya immune system is actually very much weakened, and once it's weakened, the next time any other pathogens coming in, so therefore they are not able to fight it anymore. So sometimes they may die simply because they get common cold. Okay, yang demam biasa pun orang boleh mati. Padahal apa tu? Kalau in normal person, you can easily fight it off with your antibodies. Okay, but for people with HIV, it's very hard for them simply because the white blood cell punya level is too low now. Okay, so that is the mode of actions for HIV/AIDS. And how do you actually transmit? So you should know this as well, that HIV is actually transmitted from one person to another through what? Through sexual contact. Okay, so through sexual contact, or it could be through your blood. Okay, through transfusions of blood or sharing of needles. Okay, so it will be transmitted through your blood. Okay, melalui darah kami ataupun any type of fluids, exchange of fluids. Right, so the exchange of fluids here, okay, the exchange of fluids, it could be from your saliva, it could be from your anywhere, okay, and also it could be transmitted, okay, it can be transferred through the placenta. Okay, so for example, if the mom is HIV positive, then it is possible that the unborn baby would be HIV positive as well, because the mom is sharing the blood, sharing dia punya nutrients with the baby, and therefore the virus can easily, because they are small enough, they can easily pass through the placenta as well. Okay, they can easily pass through the barrier. And what's the method of control? Okay, macam mana cara kami untuk the best way to prevent the spread of this viral infections is obviously by avoiding the sharing of needles, the sharing of anything with the blood of infected person or with the fluid of infected person. Okay, so in this case, okay, anyone who is HIV positive, they should not do blood transfusions. So maksudnya, orang tidak boleh menerima darah. Okay, and if they, so the best way to prevent this is if you menerima darah, and then the doctors, okay, or the person who is in charge, they should be screening the blood. They should screen, they should check first. Okay, they should check, they should test everything first. Okay, they should make sure that kalau yang ada, then they will have to not use it. Okay, they will just have to throw it away. Okay. Second, all hypodermic needles should be sterile and used only once and disposed of carefully. So maksudnya kalau jarum-jarum itu tidak boleh pakai 2-3 balik. Okay, and tidak boleh dicampur-campurkan pakai orang lain juga. Okay, and third is quite obvious. Okay, you should avoid promiscuous sexual activities. Okay, especially if with a person who you don't know what their HIV status is. Okay, and what they are talking here is blah, blah, blah. Here. HIV infections rate are especially high in sub-Saharan Africa. Many of these people are not able to receive treatments with effective drugs generally for economic reasons. Okay, so if you are screened, okay, if you are screened and then you are actually diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, okay, you can actually take some drugs in order for you to reduce, to help reduce and the not really kill, but the development of the symptoms. Okay, it helps to alleviate the development of the symptoms. You can use certain type of drugs in order to make it much more comfortable for them to live. Okay, or there are certain drugs as well that I can use in order to make, even though that they are positive, but it's not possible for them to transfer the HIV simply because they have already been suppressed. Okay, the drug is suppressing the HIV, so that they cannot be transmitted anymore. Okay, so we have those type of drugs. Okay, but the thing is, okay, in some cases whereby the rates is quite high, so particularly in places where in developing countries, so contohnya here, they actually tell is in the sub-Saharan Africa, where usually, yeah, okay, these type of regions here, they are very crowded. They don't have access to, they don't have easy access to, what do we call that? Hospital. They don't have easy access to proper food. They don't have easy access to vaccinations, so on and so forth. Okay, simply because they couldn't afford it or whatsoever. Okay, so it's very hard for them to get the treatments. Okay, they don't get those type of treatments simply because of the economic reasons. Okay, because these kind of regions, they're quite poor. All right, and the government usually, it's very hard for them to get support from the government as well, because the government themselves is quite poor as well in some cases. Okay, not all. Right. So that's what hinders the effectiveness to control the spread for HIV as well. Okay, the next one, okay, the second last that we're going to discuss is about smallpox. Okay, so smallpox is a type of virus, okay, and what we call it is the Variola virus. And kalau smallpox, oh, is it the one that, yeah, anyway, smallpox, chickenpox, yeah. So they are caused by a type of virus. So the type of virus, what we call is the Variola virus, and they are transmitted through the inhalation of droplets of moisture containing the virus. So ini contohnya macam TB kan. Okay, so kalau misalnya orang yang ada smallpox, and then let's say ia bercakap tersambung orang yang orangnya semua sekali, terkena arah hidungnya apa, dan then tersirok, dan orang itu pun boleh terkena ia punya smallpox as well. Okay, and sorry. Okay, and the thing is, the good thing about smallpox, oh, well, not the good thing, it was a bad thing before. Okay, it was a very quite fatal disease. Like it kills about 20 to 60% of the adults. Okay, so anyone who gets it, about 20 to 60% of them actually die because of the smallpox. And this was long before in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. Okay, so during those times when smallpox was prevalent, they don't actually have access to vaccinations because they don't have the vaccination programs yet. Okay, but afterwards, after they do all the research, and then what will happen is they actually done their research, and they saw that smallpox, you can significantly reduce the transmissions if you do the vaccination programs, okay, the vaccination campaigns. So what they have actually done is they take the vaccines, okay, they develop the vaccines by taking a small portions of the smallpox, the actual smallpox that has been killed. Okay, they took a sample ambil smallpox virus atau dorang matikan virus satu dulu ataupun dorang pecahkan the virus, and then afterwards they only take a small portion, masukkan dalam the vaccinations, and then they actually purposely inject it to other people. Okay, and what will happen is the people that you injected, they will their antibodies will actually recognize that small bits of the virus. Okay, they'll recognize that small bit of the virus, and when they actually recognize it, what will happen is they start to produce antibodies that recognize that part of the virus. So the next time when the actual virus came in, they already have the antibodies for it because they already know, okay, this is part of the virus. So we know that this is you now. Okay, we know dari awal ani this is the virus. So that's why they can easily they can easily capture, they can easily control the spread of the virus easily. So that it's up to a point where the virus can they can no longer exhibit your punya symptoms, right? And last is the last infectious disease that we're going to discuss is about measles. Okay, measles again is caused by a virus, and this time, what's the type of the virus? It's what we call it's Morbillivirus, and quite similar to smallpox as well. They are transmitted through the inhalation of droplets of moisture containing the virus. Okay, so sama juga melalui udara, melalui moisture kalau bercakap simbol-simbol. Okay, and the thing is, this is highly infectious. So maksudnya sangat-sangat, what is infectious? Sangat-sangat merebak. Okay, sangat-sangat merebak. So that a high proportion of people who came into close contact with infected person will also get the disease. Okay, so macam tersagira saja sikit sudah terkena measles. Okay, because that's how strong, how fast the virus, the Morbillivirus is actually spreading. Okay, and how do we control? How do we prevent it? Okay, so the thing, firstly, the measles is actually a serious disease which can cause death, especially in adults and people who are not in good health. Okay, so this is actually quite serious. Okay, and serious, especially kalau orang yang cakapnya sini they who are not in good health. So orang yang andang macam mudah sakit-sakit, orang yang indah makan bisa-bisa, indah makan buah-buahan, indah makan sayur-sayuran, indah exercise whatsoever, not having access to good diet, good lifestyle, and therefore they are much more prone to getting these measles, getting these viruses. Okay, but the best way in order for you to prevent from measles, okay, ini semestinya kalau kamu in good health itu, you would be resistant towards this virus, okay, towards measles. No, okay, even though that you are healthy, you can still develop measles, okay? You can still have it, but at least that you would have the immunity, you are much more likely to be able to fight the disease if it comes. Okay, and same thing as well, the best defense, the best way in order for you to not get the measles or to not get like really sick from the measles is by having vaccinations. Okay, so this is the same case as macam coronavirus right now as well. Okay, so it is highly infectious. It is transmitted through droplets. It's transmitted to droplets, and the best way is through vaccinations. Okay, so it's quite similar to coronavirus now. And this vaccination program is highly effective, especially if 2 doses are given. Okay, same thing with coronavirus. Okay, ia sangat-sangat berkesan, especially kalau kami ambil 2 dos ia punya vaccinations. Okay, because what we are doing is we are simply preparing. Okay, the whole thing about vaccinations is you are preparing your body against the virus dari awal. Okay, yes, you might get the disease awal, tapi even if you get it, you won't feel sick. Okay, you might get the positive for measles, or you might get positive for coronavirus, but if you get vaccinated dari awal, artinya antibody untuk melawan virus itu dari awal sudah ada. So artinya virus itu indai yang mampu untuk melamahkan kamu. So kami lamahkan ia dulu sebelum ia melamahkan kami. Okay, so therefore, it would be that's why it's very good and it's the best way to fight it. Okay, in that way you would get you get healthy against it very soon. And you know, who are prone to measles? So people who are prone, so most likely to suffer from measles are therefore people who are malnourished and who live in areas where no vaccination program is in place. Okay, so same case kan sama macam coronavirus as well. Okay, orang yang macam low healthy lifestyle ataupun orang yang orang yang endang berpenakitan, okay? Orang yang ada darah tinggi, kancing manis, semua sekali itu, okay? Iatah orang-orang yang orang-orang yang tinggi risk untuk mendapat measles, untuk mendapat virus, untuk mendapat coronavirus, okay? And also siapa lagi yang likely to develop this kind of diseases is people who has no vaccination programs. Okay, in Brunei we are actually quite lucky because we have a lot of vaccination programs available. Okay, but in some countries we don't. Okay, not we don't, but they don't. Okay. Right. Last but not least, before is the last one? Yes. So before the last one. So as you can see, okay, from what we have looked. You have TB earlier, you have HIV, you have cholera, you have malaria, you have measles, you have smallpox, okay? And these type of infectious disease, they actually have different types of methods, the best methods for control. Some the best way is through vaccinations. Contohnya macam measles, macam smallpox, macam measles and smallpox. Some it is best prevention method is by avoiding sharing of blood, sharing of needles, okay, or avoiding sexual contacts. And in some is by reducing the number of vectors. Contohnya macam malaria, okay, you eradicate the number of mosquito, right? Or in some cases, you make sure that you have access to good conditions, good lifestyle. Okay, contohnya macam ada clean water, ada foodnya is always prepared in a well manner, you always wash your hands, so on and so forth. Okay, and this actually resulted in certain type of patterns across the globe whereby the diseases may occur. Okay, so contohnya is the example that we're going to discuss here is malaria. Okay, so malaria, yes, it is infectious, but it's mostly found in parts of the world where Anopheles mosquito species can act as a vector. And maksudnya arah tempat di mana mosquito itu mudah membiak. Okay, so across the globe kan arah seluruh dunia ada tempat sajok, ada tempat panas, right? Tapi kalau malaria, mosquito ini ia tinggal, ia membiak laju arah tempat yang panas. Contohnya arah mana? Arah tropical and subtropical regions, especially where humidity is high. Okay, so arah mana tu? Arah near the equator lah, termasuk arah Brunei, Malaysia, Africa, Central America, arah India, so on and so forth. Okay, tapi kalau arah UK, arah Rusia, arah America, the malaria punya disease ini is quite less likely, okay, because arah tempat sana is negeri sajok. Kalau sajok, payah mosquito untuk membiak. Mosquito membiak arah tempat panas-panas saja, macam arah tropical and subtropical region. So that's why the global pattern for malaria is only concentrated near the equatorial region saja, di mana tempat negeri panas. Tapi kalau arah negeri sajok, mana ada malaria. Okay, so it shows a pattern there. Okay, and the pattern is actually reflected with the modes of transmissions. In this case, the modes of transmission is the vector for mosquito. Okay, and the next thing is also the distribution of TB. So here, as you can see here, kalau malaria infectionsnya is mostly arah tempat negeri-negeri panas. Tapi kalau kamu lihat sini, kalau arah TB, right, if you see arah TB, ia indah semestinya arah tempat negeri panas. Kalau kamu lihat arah negeri Rusia pun ada juga, negeri China ada, in some parts of negeri UK. Okay, so why is this? So because we could identify, if you see, the cases whereby it's very high is particularly arah negeri-negeri Afrika, negeri-negeri South America, Central America, and including India and certain parts of the southeast of Europe. Okay, so in this case, these are the areas whereby a lot of TB occurrence is happening. Okay, and correlatively, okay, this is also the area whereby the living conditions are quite poor and crowded. Ini juga di mana tempat-tempatnya, negeri-negerinya tu is quite banyak slums, banyak refugee slums, banyak a lot of the areas here, they don't have access to good water. Tempatnya tu is very sempit, terlampau ramai orang sampai berjuta-juta. Okay, orangnya tu, and therefore kalau ramai orang berjuta-juta, artinya tempat orang tinggal itu pun sempit-sempit. Okay, tempat sempit-sempit, and then not access to good water, not access to hygiene. So as a result, TB, occurrence of TB, and as we recall earlier, kalau TB ni, how is it transmitted? Through droplets in the air. Okay, so kalau droplets in the air, maksudnya much more kalau arah tempat yang crowded. And in this case, this is where all the populations are quite high. And this is also, populations are high and standards of living are quite low. Okay, so this is kira the best hotspot for TB punya transmissions, right? So you can see the patterns for certain diseases actually can be reflected. Okay, if you see the certain type of disease, yeah, you can see how they are more likely to be spread. Okay, and macam mana they are more likely to be spread? What are the economic factors? Yeah, okay, is it due to the economic contohnya, whether they're a poor country or a rich country. Kalau poor country, which means they have fewer access to good sanitation programs, they have poor access to sewage treatment, so on and so forth. So therefore, they are much more likely to transmit certain types of diseases, okay, as opposed to developed rich countries. But in some kind of diseases, as you can see from malaria, it doesn't really matter whether you are a poor country, whether you're a rich country, okay, you develop or less developing. It's to do with the weather conditions, okay, the environmental factors, okay, whether the place is actually suitable for the disease to bloom, okay? Suitable in this case, the vectors to be surviving or not. Okay, so it depends. So that actually contributes to the global patterns of the infectious diseases. Okay, so you should, when you're actually going through the questions, okay, certain questions when you come across the exam, right, there will be I'm pretty sure you will be asked questions, okay, evaluate the effects of the socio-economic effects, okay, the socio-economic impact of certain countries in the transmission of TB. Okay, so this is what you should be talking about. Okay, so whether it's rich country, kalau rich country, again, proper vaccination, high sanitation, and then have access to sewage, treated sewage, whatsoever. Okay, poor country, very crowded, and then poor sanitations, and therefore leads to increased spread of diseases. Okay, so those kind of things. Right, so is that it? Yes. Okay, so I think that's it for now, okay, for the lesson today. So just to recap back on what we have done. And so we go back to the lesson objectives. So we have defined what is diseases. We should know by now upper earthy infectious disease and upper earthy and contour non-infectious disease. Okay, and we've also looked at all of these infectious diseases: cholera, malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, smallpox, and measles. Right, and for each of these infectious disease, we should know what is the causative organisms. Okay, disebabkan oleh siapa, and how they are transmitted, the modes of transmissions, okay, how they are transmitted, as well as the biological, social, and the economic factors that leads to the prevention and the control of cholera. So if we know about how they are transmitted, therefore you should know how they are prevented, okay, how you should control it. And last but not least, as what we discussed just now, is that looking at the methods in which they are transmitted, then you should know, you should infer, you should be able to infer how the diseases, certain type of diseases, punya pattern actually arise across the world. Okay, which area is more likely to develop TB, which area is more likely to develop HIV, which area is more likely to develop cholera, so on and so forth. Okay, and you need to be able to relate it to biological factors, the socio-economic impact. Okay, so whether they are crowded, whether they are poor countries, whether they are rich countries, or whether they have a proper sanitation programs, proper vaccinations. If your vaccinations, can they afford it, or if they cannot afford it, and also kalau in terms of biological, contohnya macam mosquito tadi, right? Kalau mosquito tu, which area they are most likely to grow, which area that they are more likely to membiak, so on and so forth, right? So yeah, so I think that's it for today, right? And hopefully it will help to summarize your notes, summarize well with what you're learning through your schools as well. So if you've got questions, then you can, of course, you can text me and ask me about it as well. Right? So that's it for today. So see you sometime. Bye.